The afternoon light filtered through the half-drawn blinds of my study, casting long shadows across the oak desk where I'd spent the better part of 30 years crafting stories. April in Madrid had always been unpredictable. One day, sunshine, the next, a cold drizzle that seemed to seep into your bones. Today was somewhere in between, the kind of day that made you grateful for a roof over your head and work that kept your mind occupied. I was sorting through reader letters, a routine that had slowed since my last novel came out 2 years ago when the doorbell rang. I didn't usually mind these interruptions. In fact, I welcomed them. But that afternoon, opening the door, I didn't find an envelope with a postmark from some remote Spanish village. It was my son-in-law. Javier Saez stood on my porch with his hands shoved deep into the pockets of an expensive leather jacket I knew he couldn't afford. His jaw was set in that way I'd come to recognize over the past 3 years since he'd married my daughter. The look of a man who'd already decided how a conversation would go before it started. I opened the door wider. He didn't wait for an invitation. The formalities lasted about 30 seconds. No small talk about the weather or Elisa or how his real estate business was going. He got straight to it. Right there in my living room, pacing in front of the fireplace like a caged animal. 55,000 euros, he blurted out. That's what he needed. Not wanted, needed. A property deal had fallen through. The buyers had backed out at the last minute. The banks were tightening the screws. If he didn't get the liquidity by the end of the week, he'd lose everything, and Elisa, my daughter, would lose her home too. I'd heard variations of this speech before, smaller amounts, different crises, a few thousand here to cover some payments, 5,000 there for some renovation that went over budget. I'd helped twice before against my better judgment. The money never came back. The promises always did. This time, I said no. The word hung in the air between us like smoke. Javier stopped pacing. His face went through a series of expressions I couldn't quite read. Disbelief, anger, something else I didn't want to name. Then he stepped closer. I don't remember exactly what he said next. Something about loyalty, about family, about how a real father would help his daughter's husband. His voice got louder. My study door was still open behind me, and through it I could see Elisa. She was standing at the top of the stairs leading to the upper floor, one hand gripping the railing. She'd come with him. I hadn't even known she was there. I looked at her, hoping for something, support maybe, or at least acknowledgement that what Javier was asking was unreasonable. But she just stood there frozen, like a statue, her expression unreadable. That's when Javier's hand came up. The slap wasn't theatrical. It wasn't like the ones you see in movies where the actor winds up and puts his whole body into it. It was quick, sharp, and humiliating. The sound cracked through the room like a whip. My head snapped to the side, and I tasted something metallic. For a moment, none of us moved. Then Javier's voice cut through the silence, low and cold. He leaned in close enough that I could smell the coffee on his breath. "You'll regret this," he said. Not a threat, exactly. A promise. I heard something crash behind me. My hand went to my face, more out of shock than pain, and I turned to see Clara's picture frame on the floor. It had been sitting on the narrow table by the entrance. The only photo of her I kept in plain sight. The glass had shattered across her face, spiderwebbing over her smile. I stood there in the middle of my living room, my cheek throbbing, staring at the broken frame. The sting hadn't faded. If anything, it was worse now. A deep, burning ache that radiated from my jaw to my temple. I touched my face gingerly, feeling the warmth of the welt that was already forming. Clara looked back at me through the cracks in the glass, her expression frozen in that moment 2 years ago when she didn't know the cancer had already spread, when she still thought we had time, when she still believed in tomorrows. My phone started buzzing in my pocket, once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Then again, and again. It was like holding a live grenade, each vibration a small explosion against my thigh. I pulled it out with shaking hands. The screen glowed angrily, notification after notification flooding in. Text messages, all from Javier's number. I could see previews, short lines, the first few words of each. "Arturo, listen. You need to understand. This doesn't have to." I didn't read them. Not yet. I just held the phone, watching it light up over and over, each buzz a small shock against my palm, each one a fresh wave of humiliation. The late afternoon sun had shifted, abandoning the room to shadows. The corners grew dark, and the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. I could feel the chill seeping through the floorboards, creeping up my legs. Outside, I could hear a dog barking somewhere down the street. The Martinez's Labrador, probably. A car passed, someone's radio playing a song I almost recognized. Normal sounds. A normal day in a normal neighborhood in Chamartin. The kind of afternoon where nothing was supposed to happen, except nothing felt normal anymore. Nothing would ever feel normal again. I knelt down slowly, my knees popping in protest, and picked up the frame. My hands were still trembling. A piece of glass fell away as I lifted it, slicing a thin red line across Clara's cheek in the photo. I watched the blood well up from my fingertip and smear across her image, and something inside me cracked. I ran my thumb over the jagged edge, feeling the sharpness, the finality of it. 55,000 euros, a slap, a broken picture, my daughter standing on the stairs like a statue, watching her husband strike me and saying nothing. Not a word, not a sound, just that empty, unreadable expression that I would replay in my mind for months to come. The phone buzzed again. Then again. I lost count. The screen stayed lit, a constant reminder that this wasn't over. That for Javier, this was just the beginning. He wasn't apologizing. He was calculating. I could feel it in the relentless rhythm of those messages, each one a new angle, a new tactic, a new way to twist what had happened until it fit his narrative. I set the broken frame on the table, Clara's damaged smile facing up, and I stood there in the fading light alone with the buzzing phone and the throbbing in my jaw and the terrible, hollow realization that my daughter had just chosen a man who raised his hand to her father, and I had no idea what to do next. The phone buzzed again and again. I looked at the screen. 7 messages now. Then 8. I set the frame down on the table, glass and all, and stared at it. Clara's eyes looked past me toward some point I couldn't see. For the first time since she died, I didn't know what she would tell me to do. The phone kept buzzing. I kept staring. And somewhere in the back of my mind, beneath the shock and the ache in my jaw and the sick feeling in my stomach, a different kind of cold began to settle. Not anger yet. Not quite. Just a slow, creeping certainty that something had shifted. That the man who just walked out of my house wasn't going to stop. That the phone in my hand was only the beginning. I didn't answer. Not that night. I just stood there in the fading light holding Clara's broken frame, listening to the phone buzz itself into silence. By the time the sun disappeared that evening, my phone had become a weapon. 47 messages. I counted them twice, though I'm not sure why the exact number mattered. Maybe because focusing on a number kept me from focusing on what the messages actually said. Most were from Javier. Short, clipped sentences that started as apologies and devolved into something uglier. Then longer paragraphs about misunderstandings and stress and how I was overreacting. Elisa's messages arrived between his, softer in tone, but somehow worse. She asked me not to tell anyone, said it would ruin everything they'd worked for, begged me to think about the family. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her standing on those stairs, silent. When morning finally arrived, I knew what I needed to do. Not because I'd planned it or because some righteous anger had crystallized overnight. I was just tired. Tired of the buzzing phone. Tired of the ache in my jaw that wouldn't fade. Tired of sitting alone in a house that felt too big and too quiet. Elena Romero's card was still in my desk drawer where I'd left it 3 years ago. We'd met at a library fundraiser back when Clara was still well enough to attend those things. Elena had been the keynote speaker, a criminal defense attorney who'd made a name for herself getting innocent people out of prison. We'd stayed in touch loosely. Birthday cards, the occasional email about book recommendations. I called her office at 8 in the morning. Her assistant put me through immediately, which should have told me something about how I sounded. Her office was downtown, tucked into one of those old brick buildings near the Plaza de Santa Ana that Madrid had spent the last decade preserving. The elevator was old enough to have an accordion gate, and it creaked the whole way up to the 4th floor. Elena met me at the door herself. No handshake, no small talk. She took one look at my face and gestured me inside. Her office smelled like old paper and strong coffee. A mahogany desk dominated the room, stacked with case files and yellow legal pads covered in her precise handwriting. She poured me a cup without asking and sat down across from me. I told her everything. The doorbell, the request for money, the refusal, what happened after. My voice stayed level the whole time, which surprised me. It felt like I was describing something that had happened to someone else. She didn't interrupt, just took notes on one of those legal pads, her pen moving quickly across the page. When I finished, she set the pen down and looked at me. Did anyone else see this happen? She asked. I thought of Elisa on the stairs. My daughter. She was there. Elena's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. Will she back up your account? I didn't answer right away because I didn't know, and that not knowing felt like its own kind of violence. I don't think so, I said finally. She nodded slowly, like she'd expected that. Then we need evidence. Security cameras, neighbors who might have heard something. That's when I remembered. The doorbell camera. I'd installed it the previous spring after a package went missing from the porch. Clara had teased me about it, said I was becoming one of those paranoid types who checks their phone every time a leaf blows across the yard. She wasn't wrong, but I'd kept it anyway. Elena's expression shifted when I told her. Not quite a smile, but close. You have the footage? On my phone. The app stores everything for 30 days. She stood up. Show me. We crowded around her computer screen and I pulled up the app on my phone, casting it to her monitor. The footage loaded slowly, buffering in the maddening way technology always does when you need it most. Then there it was. My front door. The timestamp in the corner reading yesterday's date. Javier walking into frame. I thought watching it would be easier than living through it. I was wrong. The video had no sound, but it didn't need it. You could see everything. Javier gesturing, me shaking my head, his hand coming up, my head snapping to the side, the picture frame falling, Elisa's silhouette at the top of the stairs, barely visible through the doorway. But there, frozen. Elena watched it twice without saying anything. Then she leaned back in her chair. This is assault, she said. Not a question. A statement. Clear, documented, unambiguous assault. And your son-in-law is an idiot for not checking if you had a camera? Something about the way she said it, so matter-of-fact, like she'd seen 1,000 cases just like this, made the tightness in my chest ease slightly. This wasn't just my word against his anymore. This was real. Provable. What do I do with it? I asked. She pulled up a fresh document on her computer. We file a police report. Attach the video. Let them decide whether to press charges. She paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. But I need you to understand something, Arturo. Once you do this, there's no taking it back. Your son-in-law will know. Your daughter will know. This becomes official. I thought about the 47 messages, about Clara's broken frame, about Elisa standing silent on those stairs. I understand. The rest of the afternoon blurred together. Paperwork, statements. Elena walking me through what would happen next, how the police would review the footage, likely issue a citation, possibly an arrest warrant, how Javier would be notified, how this would become a matter of public record. I signed everything she put in front of me. My hand didn't shake. By the time we finished, the sun was starting to dip below the buildings outside her window. Elena saved the video file to her computer, then to a thumb drive, then uploaded it to a secure cloud server. 3 backups. She was thorough. I'll send this to the police department tonight, she said. You should hear from them within 48 hours. I stood to leave, but she stopped me with a hand on my arm. Her grip was firm, steadying. You did the right thing, she said. I wanted to believe her. Almost did. I drove home through evening traffic, my hand steady on the wheel, my mind oddly blank. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a long time, staring at my front door. The doorbell camera was a small black circle next to the frame, barely noticeable unless you knew to look for it. Such a small thing. Such a huge difference. My phone buzzed. Another message from Javier. I deleted it without reading. Then I went inside, poured myself a drink I didn't want, and waited for whatever came next. The envelope arrived 3 days after I'd sent the video to the police. Elena's assistant dropped it off personally. A thick manila packet with the seal of the Juzgado de Instrucción número 4 de Madrid embossed on the front. Inside was a copy of the criminal complaint and a summons for Javier to appear before a judge. I sat at my kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. The language was formal, impersonal. El Pueblo de Madrid contra Javier Sáez Gómez. Charges. Assault in the 4th degree. Possible penalties. Up to 90 days in jail, probation, mandatory anger management classes. Elena had offered to have the summons delivered through the police, Standard procedure. They'd serve him at work or at home, hand him the papers, and that would be that. Clean, professional. But sitting there with the envelope in my hands, I realized I didn't want it to be clean. I wanted him to see my face when he got it. Wanted him to know that I wasn't hiding behind lawyers or court officers. This was me choosing to hold him accountable, choosing not to let it go. Maybe that was petty, probably was, but I'd spent 3 nights sleeping poorly and 3 days ignoring messages from Elisa asking me to reconsider, to think about what this would do to her marriage, to please just let it drop. I was done being reasonable. I put the envelope in my jacket pocket and got in my car. Javier's building was in the heart of the financial district. One of those new luxury developments, all glass and steel, with a doorman who waved me through without question. The elevator was sleek and modern. I pressed 12 and watched the city drop away through the glass walls. Their unit was at the end of the hall. I could hear music playing inside, something jazzy and upbeat. I knocked twice, hard. The music cut off. Footsteps. Then the door opened and there was Javier. He looked different than he had in my living room. Better. His hair was combed, his shirt pressed. No sign of the tension that had radiated off him when he demanded money. If anything, he looked almost pleased to see me. "Arturo," he said, "I wasn't expecting you." He glanced past me, checking if I was alone. Then his eyes dropped to my jacket pocket, where the corner of the envelope was visible. "Come in. Let's talk." I didn't move, just pulled the envelope out and held it between us. "This is for you." He took it, smiling, though the smile had gotten tighter. His fingers worked at the seal, tearing it open with an eagerness that made my stomach turn. He thought I'd brought him a check. Actually believed I'd come here to pay him off. The summons slid out into his hand. I watched his face as he read it. Watched the confusion first, then the comprehension, then the color draining from his skin. "What is this?" His voice had gone very quiet. "It's a court summons," I said. "For assault. You're being charged." He looked up at me, and for a second I saw fear. Then it was gone, replaced by something uglier. "You're serious," he said. Not a question, an accusation. "You're actually doing this?" "Yes." His hands crumpled the paper. "Over nothing? Over a misunderstanding? You're going to drag us into court over—" "It's on camera," I said. The words came out before I could stop them. Cold, sharp, satisfaction curling through my chest as his face went slack. I shouldn't have said it, knew it the instant the words left my mouth. Elena had told me explicitly not to tip our hand, not to let him know about the footage until discovery. But standing there in his doorway, watching him try to minimize what he'd done, I wanted him to know. The silence stretched between us like a wire pulled taut. Then Javier's face twisted into something I barely recognized. He took a step forward, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and cloying. "Did it take a slap to wake you up?" His voice was low, venomous. "At your age, you should know better. Just hand over the money quietly and save yourself the embarrassment. But no, you had to make this difficult." He kept talking, but I'd already turned away, started walking back toward the elevator. My hands were shaking now, adrenaline flooding my system. Behind me, Javier's voice rose. Threats about lawyers, something about Elisa, a string of words I didn't want to parse. The elevator doors opened. Someone was getting off on this floor, an older woman with a small dog who took one look at Javier shouting in his doorway and hurried past with her eyes down. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the garage. The doors slid shut, cutting off whatever Javier was saying mid-sentence. The descent felt longer than the climb. I leaned against the glass wall and watched the floors tick by, trying to steady my breathing. "It's on camera." Why had I said that? What did I think would happen? All I'd done was give him time to prepare, time to lawyer up, maybe time to come up with some counter-narrative. Elena was going to be furious when I told her. The parking garage was dim and cool. I found my car and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. My hands were still trembling slightly, and I gripped the steering wheel until they steadied. I'd wanted to see his face when he got the summons. Mission accomplished. But now he knew about the camera. Knew I had evidence. And whatever slim chance there had been of him taking this quietly had just evaporated. I started the car and pulled out into traffic. The drive home felt longer than usual. Every stoplight an opportunity for my mind to replay the conversation. The look on his face when he saw the summons. The way his voice had dropped when I mentioned the camera. my own stupid satisfaction at catching him off guard. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the satisfaction had curdled into something else. Regret, maybe, or just exhaustion. My phone buzzed. A text from Elena. Summons delivered? I typed back. Yes. Didn't mention the rest. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I got out of the car and went inside, closing the door behind me with more force than necessary. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I stood in the entryway, looking at the spot where Clara's frame used to sit, and wondered what she would say about what I'd just done. Probably that I was an idiot. Probably that I'd let my ego get in the way of strategy. She'd be right. But here's where everything changed. Here's where the story takes a turn you won't see coming. 2 weeks later, I sat in Elena's office going over trial preparations. My case was solid. The video was undeniable. Javier's lawyer had tried to get it thrown out, claiming it was obtained without consent, but the judge ruled that there's no expectation of privacy at someone's front door. We were winning. Then Elena's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, frowned, and answered. I watched her face as she listened. Her expression shifted from confusion to surprise to something I couldn't read. That was the prosecutor, she said slowly, hanging up. Javier's lawyer just called. They want to meet. Tomorrow morning. Javier wants to make a statement. A statement? What kind of statement? Elena leaned back in her chair. Apparently, your daughter left him last night, packed a bag, took the car, and went to a women's shelter. And before she left, she went through his computer. Found everything. Bank accounts, fake contracts, emails to other victims. She sent it all to the prosecutor an hour ago. I stared at her. Elisa did that? She did more than that. She's willing to testify against him for everything. The room spun slightly. My daughter, the one who'd stood frozen on those stairs, who'd sent me those pleading messages, who'd chosen him over and over, had finally opened her eyes. The meeting the next morning was surreal. Javier sat at a conference table with his lawyer, but the arrogance was gone. His face was pale, his eyes darting. He looked like a man watching his life collapse in slow motion. Across from him sat the prosecutor, Elena, and me. But the real surprise came when the door opened and Elisa walked in. She looked different. Tired, yes. Dark circles under her eyes. But something else too. Something I hadn't seen in years. Clarity. She sat down across from her husband and didn't flinch. I have something to say, she said quietly, and I want it on the record. For the next hour, she laid it all out. The fake investment schemes, the victims he targeted, an elderly widow in Alcalá de Henares who'd lost her life savings, a young couple in Getafe who trusted him with their wedding money, a small business owner in Vallecas who'd gone bankrupt because of him. Names, dates, amounts. She documented everything. When did you find all this? The prosecutor asked. Some of it over the years, pieces I didn't want to see. The rest I found on his computer 2 nights ago. She looked at me then, really looked at me, for the first time since that awful day. I'm sorry, Papa. I'm so sorry it took me this long. Javier erupted. This is lies. She's lying. She's trying to save herself because she helped me. Elisa didn't even glance at him. I did help him, she said calmly. I made phone calls. I reassured people. I told myself he was just a businessman who cut corners, that it wasn't really fraud, that everyone does it. But I was wrong, and I'll accept whatever consequences come from that. The room went silent. Javier's lawyer put a hand on his arm, trying to calm him, but Javier shook it off. He stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. You think you can do this to me? He spat at Elisa. You think you can just walk away? You're nothing without me. Nothing. You and your pathetic father and your dead mother. Enough. The prosecutor's voice was sharp. Sit down, Mr. Saez, or I'll have you removed. But Javier kept going, his voice rising. Your mother was so easy, so desperate to feel useful in her last months,